the discussion part. It's just so that we've got the presentation for future reference. Okay, so just a few housekeeping rules before we start. Please do make sure you've got your name clearly entered so that we know who's who and who's asking questions, especially for later in the discussion. Keep your microphone muted unless you're speaking, just so that we don't disturb the recording or the speakers. If you want to say something, please either raise your hand, or you can write something in the chat, or wave in the video, whatever works for you, really. You can also, of course, use the chat function to make comments, ask questions. It doesn't have to be out loud. It's whatever you feel more comfortable with. I'm sure it doesn't need to be said, but please do be respectful and use appropriate language. And we have a Slack channel from our network that can be used for further discussion. So what is this network? Well, for those of you who don't already know, it's the network of early career ocean professionals who are based at EMB member organizations. But of course, it's open to wider than those for these sessions. You don't have to be an early career ocean professional or based at an EMB member organization to come to these events. But that is very much who this webinar series is aimed at. So this network was established last year by the EMB Young Ambassadors, one of whom is a speaker today, and the Secretariat. And it's really an opportunity to network and meet peers across Europe, but also gain a voice at EMB level. So quite useful and valuable, I think, for those people. And of course, we have this ECOP webinar series, which happens every Wednesday, the first Wednesday of the month, and looks at different topics linked to marine science and policy. Speaking of which, today's topic, we'll be looking at including socioecological knowledge from different stakeholders, and we have two speakers. So we'll first hear from Dr. Marcos Llope, who is from IEO in Spain, and then we'll hear from our Ambassador Alfredo, who is also from IEO, and they will speak about their experiences in working with different stakeholders, and then we can have a discussion. So Marcos, I will stop sharing my screen and I will hand over the floor to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Paula. I'll try to share my screen. Yes, can you see my slide properly?
Yes, we see your slide.
All right, so off we go. I like to be considered an early career scientist, so thank you for that. And today I'm going to talk about my experience interacting with stakeholders, both informal and informal ways. So yes, my name is Marcos Llope, and I work as scientist at the Spanish Institute of Oceanography. I've prepared this presentation together with Alfredo. We will speak next. So I'll give a general introduction, and Alfredo will go more into detail. So I'll first explain why it is important to explicitly and implicitly include the human dimension. I'll briefly introduce a couple of projects we are working with stakeholders, and I'll let you know what European networks one can use if this issue is of interest and you don't know where to start from. And I'll end up with a couple of anecdotes, but it's going to be mainly Alfredo who will tell you take-home messages. Okay, let's get started. So we are here in planet Earth, and as marine biologists or ecologists, we are interested in its functioning, biodiversity, etc. But we are also at a moment in time that we call the Holocene, and this geological epoch is characterized for having been quite stable over the last 10,000 years or so. However, since the Industrial Revolution, the magnitude, spatial scale, and pace of human-induced change is of an unprecedented in human history. That's why we call this the Great Acceleration. So it's a step change within the Holocene. So the combination of these two issues, place and time, has given rise to this concept of the Anthropocene. And this new geological epoch will be characterized by the overwhelming and devastating influence of humans in the planet. Evidence shows as well that we have gone past a few planetary boundaries, and that we risk activating one of these planetary tipping points of unknown consequences. So yes, the situation is critical, and seems that we are on the edge of the precipice. So what can we do? We have EBM, ecosystem-based management. Well, I know this is very simplistic, but it is one of the ways we should go if we are to avoid collapse. So what is it? What is EBM? It's the paradigm of managing marine resources or marine environments. There is no one single definition. There are many definitions of EBM, but one thing is clear, that it includes the human dimension. So we should consider these stakeholders or humans in the equations if we are to achieve sustainability. If we look at the definition that ICES provides, I'll come back to ICES later on. We can see that it mentions things like appropriate human uses, strong stakeholder participation, human behavior. So again, humans are central in EBM. Another diagram that I like is this conceptual picture from NOAA, where we can see that EBM at the top includes multiple sectors and multiple goals. So EBM goes beyond the sector by sector traditional approach. So, well, we have EBM. It's not so new. It's been around for a while now. But before, the discussion were more about what is it feasible? How can we, implement it? And now it's more about how can we make it happen, because we really need it. And this is not a new concept or new for marine sciences. It applies to other fields, like this One Health concept in the field of health. And we know what happens if we don't consider things like eating pangolins and so on. And one way of developing or implementing EBM is through IEAs, Integrated Ecosystem Assessments. Again, another acronym. So IEAs are a tool that help us go through this process of implementing EBM. And I'm showing this diagram depicted by Phil Levine in his seminal paper. And you can see that the first step, well, this is an iterative cycle, but the first step, it says define EBM goals and targets. And since these are societal goals, then must be defined by stakeholders. So to sum up this introductory section, we live in a place where humans are the main driver of change. We have a conceptual framework or a view that can help us manage our activities in a better way. And this needs to incorporate humans implicitly and explicitly. That's why we usually talk about social ecological systems rather than ecosystems. And I've pasted here two conceptual, again, diagrams, how they perceive the social and ecological interactions. Okay, so the first project is Mission Atlantic. It's an H2020 project, and it consists of 9 case studies, and we are responsible for the Canary Current large marine ecosystem. It goes all the way from Gibraltar, the Strait of Gibraltar in the north, to Guinea-Bissau in the south, and it includes as well the archipelagos of the Canary Islands and Cabo Verde. So there is great diversity, not only in ecosystems, but also in the human dimension. And this applies to cultures, but also levels of development, and one aspect is languages. So in some countries, you need to speak, for instance, French in this case. Mauritania and Senegal, they use French as a communication language. You could get away with English if you interact with scientists, not all of them, but of course, if you need to include fishers, then you need to speak French or make an effort to communicate in French. As Spaniard, we have a rare advantage that we can use Portuñol, which is a mix of Spanish and Portuguese, because of the countries, Cabo Verde and Guinea-Bissau, they speak Portuguese. But I mention this because it's not normally the case for us. So yes, be open to languages and cultures. And it's important to include the stakeholders in this particular case, because if it wasn't for this interaction, we wouldn't have been so aware of the implications of a new discovery, a gas field off the coasts of Mauritania and Senegal, and this is going to change the whole picture. So we carried out an integrated ecosystem assessment in this regional sea or large marine ecosystem, and then we find out that this new upcoming project will change the whole setting. So that's one of the reasons why it is important to interact with stakeholders. The second project is Nakibir, and this is funded by the Ministry of Science in Spain. The case study here is what we call the coupled social-ecological system of the Guadalquivir estuary and Gulf of Cadiz here in southern Spain. And the interesting thing here is that the estuary functions as a nursery role for commercial species such as anchovy. So what happens at the estuary doesn't stay there, but spreads across the Gulf of Cadiz. You can think of recruitment and fisheries, for instance. At the same time, it concentrates a number of human activities. I don't know if you see my pointer, but we have, for instance, a dam that controls the inflow of fresh water in the system. We have rice production, we have aquaculture, we have the city of Seville, national park. So there are many sectors involved. And due to this, the diversity of stakeholders is great, is huge. But Alfredo will tell you more about this in a minute. And how to achieve EBM here depends as well on the views people or stakeholders have of this ecosystem. And we have identified three main views. One of them considers the estuary mainly as a canal for shipping. There's another view that focuses more on food production, be this rice agriculture or aquaculture. And there would be a third view that leans more towards the protection and enhancement of this nursery role that the estuary has. So if you by now think that it is interesting to include the human dimension or stakeholders in your research, but you don't know where to start from, I'll give you a few tips. So there is this network of scientists called ICES, the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea. And ICES is also the main advice provider to the European Union and other international organizations. So it is really at the interface between policy and science. And ICES has a number of expert groups. Some of them belong to what we call the Strategic Initiative on Human Dimension. We have one called WG Social, which works with social indicators. And for instance, this workshop called WKCCMM, where we tested social methods. You can check the report if you are interested. So I would suggest that you engage with one of these groups if you're interested. And there are other groups called the IA groups, Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Groups, and there is almost one per ICES ecoregion. So I'm sure you will find yours if you are in Europe at least. So yeah, the diversity is good, but it's true that it poses a challenge. And here come my take-home messages. So I would recommend to engage with social scientists if you can, because they really give you a different perspective. I'm a natural scientist, so I learned a lot from them. We included, for instance, or are collaborating with David Florido, who is an anthropologist from the University of Seville, and Babacar Diop, who is a sociologist from University of Ziguinchor in Senegal. And as I said earlier, if it wasn't for that, Babacar wouldn't have been totally aware of the implications of these new gas projects of Senegal and Mauritania that can change the whole landscape. It's also important to make informal contacts beforehand. I visited this NGO, Hahatai, in Gandiol, in Senegal, and there I learned that they perceive the fishing foreign fleets as responsible for the collapse or the depletion of their marine resources. And that forces them to use the traditional artisanal boats to migrate. And we know the dramatic consequences that this can have. So yeah, making informal contacts, because after this, we invited them to the workshop we held and were able to incorporate this knowledge into our analysis. Respect diversity as well. And I would like to touch upon a hierarchy here. In some countries, this is important, and it's not very polite if you invite the individual scientists directly. So it's better to go through the director of the institute in some instances. And this is not totally new to us, because in Europe, we have also these differences. And I can think of Germany like being more hierarchical, for instance, than the Netherlands, or in the Iberian Peninsula, that would be probably Portugal being more in this sense, formal than in Spain. So be aware of that not everything works as at home in different countries. And also another important thing to me is that perceptions are real. So coming back to my previous example, if these people think that the foreign fleets are responsible for the depletion of the resources, it's a perception. So it operates in the system, whether this is true or not. For instance, the European fishing fleets are supposed to only fish the surplus production, but they perceive that they are responsible for the depletion of the resources. So keep this in mind as well, that perceptions are real. And don't forget that studying the human species is fun. So I would encourage you to do it. And that was all from me. So if you have any questions, I'll be around, and you can always send an email to my address. And over to you now, Alfredo. I'll stop sharing.
Okay, thank you, Marcos. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, then after to have seen what use. Sorry. So after the Marcos introduction, I'm in my part of this talk. I will talk more a practical way. I mean, I am going to talk about our concrete experience working with the stakeholders. We hope that this experience can be useful for you, give you ideas to work together with stakeholders, or inspire new ways to work together with stakeholders. Concretely, first of all, I am going to explain what tools we have used to study the social context, to select properly stakeholders, and after to extract information from these stakeholders. This way, I'm going to start explaining what is and for what we have used the social network analysis. So what is this social network analysis? As definition, we come to say that the social network analysis is the process of investigating social structure through the use of network and graph theory. In our case, we use this tool to study the socio system, and in this way to get useful information to organize participative processes. But I think that always is easier to understand it with an example. Then in this case, I'm going to talk about our case study in Snackable project. Then in the case study of the Snackable project, we have a estuary where there are a nursery essential to many commercial species like sardine or anchovy, importance for the economy and the culture in the area. This estuary and this nursery support many impacts from activities like fishing, agriculture, mining, or shipping, amongst others. The social system around the estuary is super complex, where in addition, there are confronts between actors with their activities nature. Then our first work in Snackable was study the social system around of the Guadalquivir estuary before to begin to work together with the stakeholders. To do it, we carry out a social network analysis from personal interviews where we asked to more than 50 actors about several issues. First of all, we asked about the relationship between stakeholders, concretely about recognition between actors, assiduity in the relationship, and about the relationship in the management. I have no time to explain all the results, but to understand the result from these interviews, I'm going to explain in a visual way some concrete result about the assiduity in the relationship. Well, this is the complete network for the assiduity in the relationship to the Guadalquivir estuary socio system. In this slide, you can see nodes that represent each one of the stakeholders and lines that link the nodes that represent if there are relationships or not between a stakeholder and the importance of the relationship. As in this net, we cannot distinguish practically nothing because there are a lot of information. We are going to take only some stakeholders from some sectors to explain some interesting results. Here you can see the actors that are part of the government. As you can see, practically every actor are connected between them. So we can to say that there are a good communication between all government actors. Now we have added every stakeholder related with fishing. Practically every fishing stakeholder have relationship only with a government part, this node, Dirección de Pesca y Acuicultura. So we can say that Dirección de Pesca y Acuicultura is a good intermediary between fishing and the government. In addition, we can see that Asociación de Pescadores, this node, is very far of the net. It means that have low relationship with this part of the network. Adding also every stakeholder from agriculture, we can see that agriculture have practically zero relationship with fishermen, but government is the bridge between these two sectors. So government can be a perfect intermediary between these sectors. By last, adding every stakeholder from the shipping, only two really, we can see that one of them is a central actor that this node concretely, that has a relation with practically every stakeholder of every sector, while the other is totally out of the net. Well, this example has been more visual, and from it we can to have an idea about the importance of some stakeholders, but if you want, you can get concrete metrics about the stakeholder importance into this network. I only want to name this metric because I don't want to bore you. Then from the analysis, we can extract some measure, naming centrally measures like degree, betweenness, and closeness. This central measure gives us information about who are the key actors in this social system, regarding their number of connections or the quality of these connections. This information is super useful. For example, when we want to work about concrete issues with the stakeholders. A clear example could be if we want to work about the relation between fishing and agriculture. In this case, could be interesting work together with key actors from fishing and agriculture and include the government like bridge between these two sectors. But we can also profit the interviews to do other questions to know other characteristics about the social system. For example, we ask the stakeholder about how much power have the other stakeholders and about if are the stakeholders against or aligned with the goals. In our study, we found an interesting inverse relationship between these two questions. This means that when more power have a stakeholder, is less aligned with the goals of the social system. In other words, powerful stakeholders have worse relationship with the rest of the net. Also, we can profit the interview to ask about their management goals and main problems in the area. In our study, the majority of stakeholders think that illegal fishing, water pollution, drug trafficking, and alien species are biggest problems in the Guadalquivir estuary. Summarizing a little bit the possibilities when we use social network analysis, we can to know key stakeholders, also their power and their kind of relationships with the rest of stakeholders, and their management goals. To know all this information, I mean, to know the social context, is especially useful for us before to begin a participative process with the stakeholders. For example, after this study, we take into account the results to select key stakeholders, to working together with them to each big problem identified. I mean, we chose different stakeholders to work about illegal fishing that to work about water pollution, depending on the concrete stakeholder characteristic. In addition, in each workshop, we sit stakeholders in different places of the table looking for interaction that can be useful to get information. For example, ONGs are against the shipping goals in our case study. So we're looking for to have them sit one in front of the other to get interaction between them. Okay, then after to have seen what is and what use can have the social network analysis, now I want to talk about the other tool that we have used. This tool was used after the social network analysis to extract information from stakeholders during several workshops in the south of Spain, but also in Senegal. The tool is named conceptual modeling. But what is exactly conceptual modeling? Well, the definition that I usually use to explain it to stakeholders is that a conceptual model is a representation of a system made up of the composition of concepts that are used to help people know, understand, or simulate a topic that the model represents, including the important entities and the relationship between them. But in my opinion, this is too abstract to a good comprehension. And I think that the better way to understand what is a conceptual model is using an example. I love this example. I don't know if you know that United States has been shooting hot air balloons because they consider them as UFOs. In my opinion, North Americans are very fun sometimes with their conspiracy theories. They were thinking about the balloons were being used by China to spy them, but without discard another options, like these balloons were alien origin. Okay, this story is fantastic to put a simple example. Okay. To show you an example, I'm going to use a free software called Mental Modeler. Here, imagine that we have a group of stakeholders formed by the stakeholders from people from the army and people from the government of United States and researchers, for example. These people, the stakeholders have the objective of improve the North American safety regarding the Chinese spying and the alien attack possibilities. Okay, and these stakeholders have information about the best way to proceed with the hot air balloons. So they decide that shoot them is a good option. Also, or another good option is to study the hot air balloons in the earth. And this decide that speak with the hot air balloon is not good option. Okay, but all these options are have consequence. So if we sub them, the Chinese spying decrease. Okay, but if we sub them, the alien attack possibilities is increased. Okay, and if we speak with the hot air balloon, the Chinese spying increase, but the alien attack possibilities decrease. Okay, this is in addition, this is a consensual model. Okay, for this reason, it's a very useful tool to manage this kind of situation. In addition, we also can visualize future scenarios. For example, what happened here? Okay, here. What happened if we sub them more to the hot air balloons? In this case, alien attack possibilities increase, and the Chinese spying decrease, but the North American safety increase a little bit. But what happened if we increase to speak with the hot balloons? In this case, the alien attack possibilities decrease, and the Chinese spying increase, and the North American safety decrease a little bit. Well, this is a simple example, okay? But this tool is especially useful with a more complex example, with like the example of a socio-ecosystem, a complex socio-ecosystem. So coming back to our presentation. Okay. Sorry. Okay. We use this tool in our case of the Canary Current project in Mission Atlantic. Okay. Concretely, we have working in the camp with people coming from Senegal and Guinea-Bissau to extract information about the socio-ecosystem to try to get an integrated ecosystem assessment. This was our expert group in Dakar. It was composed by local fishermen, ONGs, students, and researchers. The experience was really fantastic. This is our final conceptual model. We are still working with analyzing the analysis of the data, but I can share with you some interesting results. They are especially worried by the corruption in the country, also by the climate change or the migration, and how these affect activities like fishing. Also, it's remarkable that this country has currently important projects to extract oil and gas, as Marco said, from the sea bottom. They say that about the importance of the exploitation of this resource, and for the moment they admit to have few interest in the green energies developed. They won't exploit oil and gas because they think that this is a better option, is the better option to get a fast country developed, improving their quality of life. Well, to carry out a small summary about what we have learning from this experience working with a stakeholder, I want to say that although we work together with a stakeholder from different cultures, everyone had similar behavior during the workshops. In general, every stakeholder had an open behavior to participate. That is great, and it did easy our work. The sense of humor was very useful for them and for us as icebreaker to resolve conflict. This is a fantastic tool, the sense of humor, in our opinion. They are especially interested in communicate every details from their activity and their experience. For us was not complicated get relevant socio-ecosystemic information. In addition, I want to share you from our experience what we think that is useful to engage a stakeholder and work with them. In the first place, I think that it's necessary to be clear with your goal. If you are transparent, you will get the stakeholder confidence. This confidence, in my opinion, is the key of the success in many occasions. To know them and to empathize with them. This get that the stakeholder feels understood and comfortable with you. Inform often. You shouldn't lose the contact with them and inform, for example, about their project advance is a perfect way to achieve it. Careful with the stakeholder fatigue. Try to have enough stakeholders to be able to don't fatigue them, using different stakeholders to different tasks. Humans are emotional animals, so try to communicate with them from a close friendship way. Plan the meeting well. In this way, stakeholders won't waste their time. To be neutral. This is essential, in my opinion. In many occasions, stakeholders will be confronted, and you don't so take part. Under promise and over deliver. In order to don't ring their expectation, do not promise that you cannot fulfill. Finally, and to encourage a little bit open discussion, we want to throw some questions. Do you think that is really useful working together with the stakeholders? What do you think about the value of their information? Have you had some experience working together with the stakeholders? What tools do you know to work with them? So that is all for my part.
Thank you very much, both of you. That was absolutely fascinating. I'm just going to stop the recording before we start a discussion.